2 years after the 3DS was discontinued, a mysterious new game was quietly released on the eShop. Booting it up greets you with the game's logo, a ship, and 4 wordless icons. There is no written word in this game. Touching the play icon, you spawn into an underground labyrinth. As the surrounding synths drone in and out of harmony, you adapt to this new body. This place, built of concrete tile and sheet metal, wordlessly compels toward danger. After killing enemies that look utterly alien in their lack of features, their colors garishly popping out from the environment, you exit the dark twists of the maze to a room flooded with light. These are the first 10 minutes of Automaton Lung. It's so sick. Atmosphere so rich and dense, it felt like I was playing a bar of dark chocolate. And seriously, the soundtrack infuses everything with an instinctual sense of foreboding. The homie Thor talks about the soundtrack in way more detail in their video on the game, but I'll just say that yes, it does fit into the minimalist, brutalist vibe of the game. There's very few sound effects, so the focus is mainly on the songs, which I think is a great choice. This game lives in its atmosphere. Again, there's no words, so everything you learn is through experimentation and context. The design of the levels play into that a lot, using rooms and curiosity to guide you to trying new stuff to see what works. Like, this wide gap is way too far to jump, but I noticed that the hoverboard falls slowly and can get going fast, so after a big run-up I was able to cross it. Or even just seeing that there's a level entrance on this mountain got me to figure out how to get the ship to fly higher by feathering the acceleration to increase the angle of flight. Oh yeah, the ship is your way of getting between levels. If there's any more to it than that, I haven't discovered it yet. Once you land, it's all about searching for these things. I don't know what they are, but they're the only thing the game keeps track of on the startup screen, so I've taken to collecting as many as I can. Plus, they refill your health, which is nice. This meter is your health, by the way. Most enemies can rush you down if you let them, so I usually lock on and strafe or walk backward. Bullets can go really far, so I try to keep my distance. Moving around feels really good. The jump is low to the ground, but that's because when you jump, it can be comboed with a dash to actually gain height and distance. You can dash multiple times in the air too, as long as there's enough time for the cooldown to refresh. Combine that with the hoverboard for speed and distance, and a lock-on for combat, and the toolbox of schmoove you get access to is honestly pretty dang fun to just mess around with. Plus, there are dynamic stage elements like springs or teleporters, so there's a lot of variety in how you move. Especially with the different enemy types, they all move around in distinct patterns, so you too have to adapt in order to keep enough distance to take them out safely. All of that granular game design stuff serves as a great foundation, but it really is the vibe that makes this game so special. The lack of tutorials or explanations is so cool, it makes me start asking all these questions. What does the title mean? Who built these massive cities and labyrinths? Where did everyone go, and where did all these weird monsters who don't look like anything else come from? I get the feeling that you play as the automaton, and if my storytelling instincts are correct, this just may be where you were created, this broken tube that you spawn next to. But what are we collecting, and why are we doing it? It's that air of mystery, that craving to find a place in this world that compelled me to keep exploring. It's awesome stuff, although I will say that mapping the camera to a circle on the touchscreen can at times be really rough. The other rough edges of the game add to the experience, but the camera controls are just plain tiring after a while. That's just the nature of the 3DS, so it's not entirely the game's fault either. It's a tiny complaint though, this game is just stunning otherwise. Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures. It's the Pac-Man! I hope that was enough tonal whiplash to wake you up, because we have a lot to get into with this game. From the mid-2000s reboot era of Pac-Man, the Pac is return. Did you know that Pac-Man eats, and that his parents died in war?
Everyone in class should come and bring their parents! Yay!
Not everyone.
Listen, if I got into the Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures lore right now, this video would quickly be a 2-hour-long explainer, so I'm just gonna say, yes, the villain is named Betray Us. Yes, the doctor's name is Dr. Buttocks in the show. This guy's name is Circumference. He has a robot servant named Grinder. The original Japanese opening of the show has a record scratch in it. The 3DS game, though, How's that? Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, it's really on brand. It's super close to the world they built in the show. As a game, it's not terrible either. It's a 2D platformer that's score-focused. You'll want to be chaining together as many ghosts as you can without touching the ground to maximize points. The most basic tool for this is Pac's homing attack type move, which if you eat a ghost, gives you another jump that you can use to get to another enemy. That's the basic flow of the game, clearing large sections airborne, then moving through a brief platforming challenge before eating more enemies. There's a few different enemy types to give variety to that flow, requiring held or mashed inputs. Of the 2 bosses I fought, one wasn't too bad. So the Cyclops Ghost is an interesting example of game design. It has clearly defined phases, and the way you damage it requires the player to have mastery of chaining enemies in the air. Some of these attacks are real classics too. There's an attack where the boss jumps in the air and you wait for it to fall. There's an attack where the boss puts bombs in the air and you wait for them to fall. And there's an attack where the boss puts enemies in the air and you wait for them to move into position to attack. It's really cool that the boss is invincible for 2/3 of the fight, and that there's a random chance you get hurt every time you deal damage to the boss. I'm feeling like a really normal video game nerd about this. The art direction is pretty good. I'm not a big fan of the extruded circles around the joints. In general, I feel like the added detail impact feels a bit uncanny, but in-game that's not all that visible, so weirdly the 3DS version of this pack is my favorite. The environment designs are really fun, especially in the more urban city areas. They have a sleeker, futuristic utopia vibe, you know, society if the pack was back type beat. It's a pretty fine experience overall, definitely worth checking out if you have a fascination with these weird brand reboots like I do. Also just licensed games in general, which is why I took a look at Brats Fashion Boutique. It's a really good extension of the whole idea of Brats, creating a whole game around playing dress up with moving characters instead of the typical dolls. It keeps centered in the Brats lane, with all of the clothing items and styles being similar to what was on offer in the doll line. Of course, the game also features 4 main Brats as the playable characters, with each heading up her own boutique in a shopping mall. The framing for this is that the original stylist quits, and if somebody doesn't get in there to make suave recommendations quick, the mall will go out of business. Luckily, Brats takes place in a fantasy world, and in real life, shopping malls are doing really good. Local commerce in America is thriving, dude. I love going out with my friends to the main gameplay loop is making inventory, helping customers choose items, then selling the items. Helping customers unlocks various patterns, extras, and furnishings to customize the shops with. None of the individual parts are particularly exhilarating, but as a whole, the game does feel pretty complete. Making the clothes is the most complicated part by far, so let's get into that. You'll be playing a sequence of mini-games each time to roll, cut, sew, and detail the garment you're working on. These mini-games are the same each time, and it's not terribly difficult to get a good score on most of them. Rolling is the only one I didn't consistently destroy, although I'm not sure if that's because I'm bad, because my touchscreen is a little finicky, because the controls aren't great, or a combination of all those things. Do we have to think about the nuances of the controls in Brats Fashion Boutique? Yes, we do. Let's rank the mini-games. At the bottom of the list is sorting, because my touchscreen isn't great, and if it was, this game would be over in like 2 seconds. Up next is fabric cutting. The enjoyment I get out of this exclusively comes from scribbling. I love a good scribble. Number 2 is rolling. It's a 2-part minigame that has some fun varied motions and a good timing element, but it's a little bit tedious to control. And topping our list at number 1 is sewing. Everyone give a big hand to sewing! Its controls work, and the patterns change between rounds. That's what I call innovative gameplay. I'm honestly not sure if you even need to get a good score on any of these. I don't think that clothes are affected at all by the grade. Similarly, I'm not sure if you need to do anything other than give characters the type of clothes they want, like shirt or pants. I get it though, this is meant to be a doll sim more than anything else, so the shallower the mechanics, the wider range of kids will be able to play with and enjoy it. Looking at what this game was made to be, and who it was for, it's hitting every mark dead on. Accurate depictions of the characters, it preserves the core play pattern of the toys, remains easy enough to stay accessible, and it brings you into the world of the license, even if Brats isn't too different from our own circa the mid-2000s. I'm not super into it, but that's simply how it be. Here's a license that's built for me. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal World Duel Carnival. Card games, man. I put like 80 hours into Balatro the first month I owned it, and I've definitely put more hours in that into Yu-Gi-Oh! Between collecting, going to shops, playing online simulators, and playing games like this one. I'd really like to do some deep dives into the different eras of Yu-Gi-Oh! And their games at some point, but for now I'll just keep it to this. World Duel Carnival is all about the card game, much like Konami's other simulators. The game gives you access to the full suite of cards available at the time, which means in the free duel mode you can put together pretty much any meta-busting deck you want to from the get-go. I spent around 40 minutes building my Dolce deck before realizing it didn't carry into the story mode, so I will say that the deck building menu is, as always, very complicated. The touchscreen works on the buttons, but only some of the time and only in certain actions, and it's just a little quirky with it the whole time. Once you get used to it though, it's not terrible. I definitely recommend writing down what deck you want to build and then going into the game to recreate it though. This feels like it would be a nightmare for coming up with a deck idea from scratch. The story mode casts you as one of the big three from the anime and tasks you with winning the World Duel Carnival. You're given a themed pre-built deck based on what archetypes your character plays in the anime, and then you're thrown into a series of duels against the NPCs. You get to choose who you duel for some of these, so there's always a new matchup to try. Once you complete enough random duels, the game will give you a meatier story section and have you duel a predetermined opponent. These sections are what make up the actual story of World Duel Carnival. It's formatted in the most basic visual novel framing possible, lacking in any CGs or unique poses, but it communicates what's going on well enough. Unlike the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games on the DS, this game isn't really a full RPG. There's no exploration or resource gathering. If anything, it's like a story mode in a fighting game, guiding you through a sequence of predetermined battles with cutscenes in between. Removing the need to grind for cards that are actually good does make the overall experience more accessible. Plus, the difficulty can be tuned a lot better in the story mode because they know how powerful the player's cards are going to be. In older titles, the balancing felt like it assumed you would be playing the strongest archetypes in the game, so it basically forced the player to do that in order to win. Not so in World Duel Carnival, or at least the parts of it I got to experience. This game is sort of a weird time capsule though. Before Master Duel and right as smartphones were getting into more people's hands, but not enough for something like a mobile dueling sim to exist. It drops the gamier elements to go for a more sim-style experience, but lacks online connectivity and keeps a story mode. It's a game made right in a transitional phase, the second to last Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to release worldwide before Master Duel, unless you count Duel Links, but let's not get into that right now. If you love Zexal for all its galaxy-ending goofiness like I do, this is a fun little romp with some of its characters, and the dueling's not half bad either. If you're not into Yu-Gi-Oh!, maybe keep it that way though, or at least don't start here. Run while you still can. While you still have money. This one has been suggested to me for a long time, and it's appeared on a ton of hidden gems lists I've seen. Within the first 5 minutes, a gaggle of anime girls mercy kills the player, so that sets the tone pretty well. It's a tactics RPG focused on individual units and a small party size. Extra damage is done by attacking from the sides or the back, and that applies both to the player and enemies. To complement this, you can choose what direction to face after moving. The first hour of the game is an extended tutorial for the mechanics of combat and the lore of the world. Luckily, and stop me if you've heard this one before, the player suffers from amnesia, so everything can be explained naturally. Well, except that he actually got amnesia like 6 months ago, so he's constantly asking about things he already definitely knows, and also explaining things out loud to people who already know them. It's not too bad, but this sort of forced exposition manifests in some funny ways, like a random villager saying that they would never have adopted the main character, Alto. See, his name is funny because Alto is a type of singer, and song was taken from man by God as a punishment for their hubris. Also, the moon exploded at some point. Long story short, witches have magic, and to become a witch, you have to have an emotional breakdown while wearing a special necklace. And then you have to go through a YouTube AMV and use a tuning fork because witches are magic so they can sing. There's only 5 of these necklaces, and Alto unknowingly had one when he woke up brain damage style, and he gave it to his sister because she adopted him and is so nice. So when their mom gets fridged in front of them, Lisette goes witch mode and becomes the Witch of Water, right? Because the necklace was blue, so it's the water one, yeah. So now she can use Bubble Beam. And then they get taken prisoner by the government, and this blindfolded lady wearing curtains tells them that she's a witch and that to go save their mom, they have to go catch the other 4 witches. It's a classic go save the 4 elemental crystals JRPG setup, except the crystals are girls, and one of them is your sister, and you can marry them. I looked it up, and if you marry your adopted sister, your mom starts asking for grandkids, so that's really cool. I know I'm being harsh on the tropiness of this game, but I just honestly don't like a lot of the more typical anime tropes. There is a ton of voice acting in the game though, and the art is gorgeous. The combat is well designed and the music goes hard, not just in combat, but in little comedic moments too. The story is genuinely intriguing and the characters bounce off each other well. There's a ton you can get out of this game. It's a really well put together tactical RPG with a ton of polish and effort put in. It is a genuinely really competent and well designed game. I just get the feeling that it really isn't made for me, you know? That random AMV was though. I was jamming out to the symbolism and fast editing being crammed through my 360p 3DS screen. An RPG that is more my speed is the Denpa Men. This is Genius Sonority's flagship series. If you don't know Genius Sonority, they made Pokemon Coliseum and a ton of spin-offs, so they know their way around a turn-based RPG with catchable party members. The Denpa Men does a lot different though. That's where the similarities to Pokemon end. Denpa Men live in radio waves and electronics, so to catch them, you look around using AR features. They're randomly generated based on info the 3DS reads from your router, so just walking to different places creates different Denpa Men. But if 2 3DS systems are in the same place, they'll find the same Denpa Men. They managed to make a real-world location-based monster generator without having any info on where the player is actually located. That is wild. The closest thing I can think of to this is Monster Rancher's feature of hot swapping in CDs to turn into monsters, but even that doesn't match in this complexity. It's really cool. The Denpa Men themselves can have various traits that help in combat, like a higher base level, different elemental resistances, or an antenna that lets them perform magical abilities, like elemental attacks or a healing spell. The Denpa Men can die. But if you revive them in the dungeon, it's okay. But they die if you leave. So then you have to pay money for an item to get them back. They can also just show up again in the main Denpa Men catching area, so that's nice. The goal of the game is an arbitrary big bad in a tower that you need to level up in order to defeat. It's not about the story, that's just a framework to contextualize these little guys existing and fighting. Honestly, the main reason to keep playing is to see what sort of fun surprises new Denpa Men will bring, and to watch the fun numbers go up. This is helped by the game having really well thought out dungeon crawling and combat mechanics. I know turn-based RPGs have fallen out of favor, but Denpa Men gets the push and pull of managing resources down really well. Each dungeon crawl asks the player to manage their MP and items to keep all your Denpa Men alive, while also pushing the player to take risks in order to get to the next checkpoint. Do you risk dying to check side rooms for extra loot? The extra combat will give you more XP, but it'll also drain your MP, which might leave you with too little to beat the boss. But you could also find a really helpful item, but that's a risk too. It's that sort of decision making that makes RPGs engaging in their dungeon sections, and this game gets it. It's definitely not a hardcore type of game though, its difficulty is set pretty low. That makes sense considering the developers don't really know what you'll be bringing to each fight, and because of that, if you ever struggle, the answer is usually to go catch more Denpa Men and buy a couple healing items. My favorite part of the game is the art style. It's like if that ProZD skit about custom outfits and cutscenes was a full video game. It's got a cartoony, goofy tone that I really enjoy. Just watching these random guys with colorful, skin-tight clothing dogpile random enemies is pretty much enough entertainment in itself. The music really fits the tone too, using a lot of quirky-sounding instruments to lend the tone of a comedy skit or a classic cartoon. It's a great game to just pick up and mindlessly plug away at. Really good for relaxing in bed while just playing something a little goofy. I like it a lot. Speedrunners all over the world put countless hours into their games daily. Whether they're 2D or 3D, wide releases or niche titles, the speedrunning community will play anything for the skill, for the fun, and for the glory. Some games have to wait longer than others for their time in the sun, but in 2020, a 7-year gap in speedrunning was broken when Hello Kitty Picnic with Sanrio friends gained its first world record. The first record was set by Otterstone Gamer, and while it can be considered a relatively unoptimized run today, it showcases the basics of the run well. Hello Kitty Picnic has 10 minigames, so the run must complete all 10 in order. Some are trivially easy, only requiring spamming the touchscreen and waiting. Others can instantly kill a run if they go wrong. Otterstone begins with a blazing fast menu navigation and to collect supplies, but loses a few seconds looking for the blue cup item. After comes the berry match minigame, which drops berries at a semi-set rate. Clearing berries quickly allows more to spawn, so Otterstone places them all into the correct baskets, then menus into the first run killer. We'll get into the details later, but after spending nearly 2 minutes on cleanup, he's able to complete Spot the Difference with relative ease, albeit with a bit of struggle with hit detection. Then comes Slide Puzzle, where Otterstone rolls a 4-move pattern. Slide Puzzle has a variety of preset shuffle states, and Otterstone has just managed to roll the second best in the game. After this comes Hidden Object, which will always take the same amount of time due to its shuffling sequences. Luckily for players, this game is in the exact midpoint of the run, giving a little room to breathe. Afterward, Otter clears Karopi's cupcakes quickly, but has to backtrack a bit to find all of them. He then has to get through Karomi's maze, one of the most precise mini-games in the run. Otterstone draws the line, waits for the cycle to line up, and sends My Melody through without trouble. Afterward comes the biggest time sink of the run, Picnic Checkers. Picnic Checkers is a weird minigame, as it's basically its own game that runners have to learn on top of the game's existing tech. It has a few special rules setting it apart from what you might normally think of as checkers. For one, the player doesn't have to take pieces, unlike tournament play. Most of the time, this rule won't come into play, but there are points in the run where not taking a piece could save time. The second rule change is simple. The player must take all of Choco Cat's pieces to win. A draw or the computer having no valid moves left will result in a loss. Otterstone spends a minute and a half on this section, struggling with the touchscreen not picking up finger taps. Finally, he coasts through Peckle's pinata, hitting the center of the pinata 5 times to finish with a time of 7 minutes and 40 seconds. And that's the entirety of Hello Kitty Picnic. It's a simple game, but between pattern memorization, optimizing movement, and learning checkers, there's room for improvement. Otterstone's record would stand for a little over 9 months before the category would be utterly obliterated. Because Hello Kitty Picnic is such a niche game, new runs of the game are rare, but the next world record wouldn't just be a minor improvement. Somehow, it would be nearly perfect. This is Cake Jerry's legendary 454. Because the 3DS is a handheld, it's notoriously difficult to get good footage of. Otterstone's original world record was recorded by a camera, but Cake Jerry's opted for a different method. I suspect that it was the homebrew Wi-Fi capture method, mainly because the frame rate is inconsistent and fairly low. Despite that, the run is incredible. Cake Jerry's menuing is so fast that it sometimes gets lost between frame skips. Her opening minigames are as fast as can be expected, losing only a second or two between both. Then comes the run killer. Cleanup is a weird minigame. It asks the player to rub the touchscreen to remove tiles of grime from different images of dishes. This at first seems trivially easy, but any runner of Hello Kitty Picnic will tell you that it is not. The developers made a standard grid for the dirt, but then placed several items along a diagonal on the grid. This makes it so that small corners, nearly or sometimes completely impossible to see, are technically touching the dish and therefore have to be cleaned to move on. But their collision is the same size as the grime, so if you miss a spot on one of these diagonal dishes, it could mean timing out and killing the run. Otterstone struggled with this in his run, but it's especially obvious in Cake Jerry's, where this fork, despite being the smallest dish in the game, takes a whole 13 seconds to clean, with most of that time being spent with the fork looking visually spotless. Cake Jerry then rolls knife and spoon during the minigame, 2 more difficult dishes, but manages to clear them on her first go. Spot the Difference goes fast, as Cake Jerry either has it memorized or close enough to finish it within 2 seconds. While the menuing between the minigames begins to slow here, the RNG is on Cake Jerry's side, and she rolls a 2-move pattern on Slide Puzzle, which lets her enter the half point of the run at just under 2 minutes. For comparison, the former world record, Otterstone's run, got here a full minute and a half later than Cake Jerry. Cake Jerry's Kakecherry's already shaved 1.5 minutes off the run just by playing around Cleanup's wonky collision, and she's about to take it home. After a break provided by Hidden Object, Kakecherry gets a fast Keroppi's Cupcakes with only a little backtracking, and then introduces some new tech to the run. Normally on Kuromi's maze, the player will have to wait for Kuromi to move up enough so that by the time My Melody crosses, she doesn't get hit and lose. But Kakecherry discovered that if the line gets drawn fast enough, you can one-cycle Kuromi, just barely avoiding a game over. It's fairly precise, requiring the line to be centered on the dirt to avoid touching grass, but she's able to get it no problem, taking another 7 seconds off the run. She then goes into Picnic Checkers, playing hyper-aggressively to clear Choco Cat's pieces as quickly as possible. Only one Choco Cat is able to get past the midpoint of the board, saving another 30 seconds. Finally, she closes the run with a good pinata and comes in at 4 minutes and 54 seconds, thanks to quick menuing and good play across the whole run. While it wasn't perfect, it was well optimized and set a new standard for the game. It set a standard so high that no one would take the record for another 3 years. And the person who would take that record is me. Yeah, out of all the games in this video, I played Hello Kitty Picnic the most, by a lot. 100%ing it only took 20 minutes, so I thought it would be easy and funny to get a world record running the game. And I won't pretend that Hello Kitty Picnic is the hardest game to speedrun ever made, but when you roll fork and spoon back to back on cleanup, it feels like it. I spent a solid 55 attempts across maybe 4 hours grinding for a record, and I only lowered the time by like 11 seconds. It's still pending when I'm writing this, but if the record goes through, it'll be my first ever submitted speedrun, and it'll be a world record, so that's really cool. As for Hello Kitty Picnic itself, this is the most fun I could possibly have playing it. As a casual game, it's probably not going to be appealing to anyone who has experience playing other games, but I could see a young kid who loves Sanrio enjoying this as an intro to what video games are. As a speedrun, well, come and take the record. If you can. Okay, so I just spent over 1,000 words on Hello Kitty Picnic, so let's see some swagadillos. That's like a swag armadillo? Like an armadillo, but he's swag. He has a swagger coach that helps him and teaches him different swaggerific things to do. Dillon's Rolling Western. This was like the series that Nintendo showed off when promoting the eShop, and all of its awesome exclusive games that you can't find anywhere else, all available for you to buy now. Oh. Well, Dillon deserved the hype. I haven't seen many people talking about this game since the Switch has been out, but it's really fun. It's a 3D action game with tower defense elements, and both of those parts combine into a game I didn't want to put down. Dillon and his friend Russ roll into town to defend the Scrogs from Grox by gathering Scruffles and supplies. He's out here saving Scrogs. I love the lingo this game uses. It just feels right phonetically. During the day, you gather supplies by rolling around the map, which also gives you time to get to know the area and build up your defenses. Once night falls, Dillon will be the main damage dealer to the enemies, dashing around to frantically make sure none of the Groks get too close. Keeping your towers up is important though, because not only do they attack Groks that get within range, but they also give you visibility on the map. When dusk hits, the town locks down, so you have to prepare in advance if you want to enforce the gates, make more Scrogs, or buy any healing items. Running into a Grok drops Dillon into a small arena with the Groks the larger enemy represents. Taking them out as quickly as possible is really important, because while you're fighting, other Groks on the map will still be moving toward the town. You'll have to make the call on which targets are the highest priority and which areas of the map can be left to fend for themselves. Make the right calls and you'll be able to cash out with more rewards. But you don't just want to spend everything you get, because after 3 days, Dillon and Russ move on to another town. It's that push and pull of resource management that gives the game longevity. And when you combine that with a combat system as kinetic and satisfying as this one, you get a really great experience. Dillon's attacks are all bound to inputs on the touchscreen, and it pulls this off super well. The player is able to adjust Dillon's angle of launch on the fly, and the interplay between timing, angles, angles and different inputs just feels good in the hands. And the whole thing is packaged in such a stylish way. Dillon's design is an all-timer in my heart. He's kicking it with Sonic and Blinks. He's like if Jak and Daxter were one guy. He's like a modern take on OVA Knuckles. There's so many cool touches in his animations and the transitions between scenes. I love the pose he hits in the saloon. It's just so perfect. The hour and a half I got with this game wasn't enough. Once I get the chance, I'm beating the entire trilogy. Sadly, the 3 Dillon games we got are probably the last, since Vanpool, the studio behind him, shut down in 2023. They were also one of the studios with Love the Lick alumni, so when someone gets the chance, put them on the chart. Man, that's a whole topic you don't even know you want a 4-hour video on. If you want to check out some more games, I have a video on tons of obscure ones on the DS. You should click it. See you later.